Hey everyone, welcome back to our channel. Welcome back to our Soap Making for Beginners mini-series. We are on to day 4. I am Anne, and along with Wayne, who is standing in the background carefully watching, making sure that I do everything correctly, we are introducing you to our Soap Making for Absolute Beginners mini-series, which is a series of 7 videos which are designed to take the absolute beginner who has never made a bar of soap before through the different stages of soap making, learning things as you go, and then by day 5 we shall be making our first bar of soap. Day 6 we shall be creating layers, and day 7 we shall be creating swirls. That is the whole point behind these videos. Today we are on day 4. If you have not seen days 1 to 3, then there are some links here to the earlier videos. Please do watch them if you want to. Hopefully they might be a little bit informative for you. So I'm going to hold my hands up straight away and say today's video is not going to be the most interesting of videos, but hopefully it's going to help you with soap making terminology. Because there is a lot of words and phrases that are used in soap making that can confuse the heck out of you if you are new to soap making and have never heard them being used before. So we're going to cover just a few, because I don't want to overload your brain, of the most common soap making phrases that you are likely to hear and what they mean. So it seems like a very obvious place to start, but the first phrase we're going to go over is cold process, which is sometimes abbreviated to CP. Cold process is basically just the method of soap making combining oils and lye together. It does not involve kind of like the cooking of the soap, unlike our next terminology, hot process, sometimes abbreviated to HP. Hot process is similar to cold process. It begins in the same way, but then heat is added, which is typically through use of a double boiler or a crock pot. And this speeds up saponification and kind of cooks the soap a little. So that is cold process and hot process soap. Next, we are on to melt and pour, which can be abbreviated to M and P. Melt and pour is basically a soap base that has already been fully saponified. It is a simpler and somewhat safer way to make soap at home. You basically melt down your melt and pour base, and then you add your own colorants and fragrances to it to create your own kind of soap. So it is not so much the actual creation of the initial soap, because the soap has already been made and is already saponified, but it's just basically melting it down and adding in your own additions to make your own soap. Now, the next thing we shall talk about, the next words: sodium hydroxide, caustic soda, lye, NaOH. These are all different ways of talking about lye. And in this case, the lye we use for this soap making is sodium hydroxide. So they are just different names for lye. NaOH is the molecular structure of lye. So the Na is the chemical symbol for sodium, the O is the chemical symbol for oxygen, and the H is the chemical symbol for hydrogen, which is what makes up lye, or sodium hydroxide, as we should refer to it if we are using the scientific chemical name. So yeah, just lots of different ways of talking about lye. So if you see NaOH written down and you're like, what is that? It's lye. If you see caustic soda written down, it's lye. Sodium hydroxide, you guessed it, it's lye. So the next words you may look at and go, what do they mean by that, is either carrier oils or base oils. These are basically just the oils that you are using to create your soaps. For example, olive oil, castor oil, palm oil, those are base or carrier oils. It is not a term for essential oils or fragrance oils. They are not classed as base oils or carrier oils. They are completely separate. So if something is referring to your base oils or your carrier oils, they are talking about those oils that go into making, well, your soap base essentially. So yeah, the castor, the palm, the coconut, things like that. And when we are talking about base oils or carrier oils, there is another word or words that are thrown around, and that is refined or unrefined. Very basically, this refers to whether or not they have been through a process to kind of refine them a little bit, which I guess is why the word refined is in there. Unrefined oils are sometimes thought of as better for the skin, as they contain a higher amount of natural nutrients. However, we use refined oils in our soap making because soap is a wash-off product, so we don't personally feel there is a huge amount of difference. Refined oils have basically just gone through a process such as deodorization or decolorization after being extracted, and they don't contain the exact same level of natural nutrients, but for a wash-off product, that is not a major issue. So it is down to you as to whether you want to use refined or unrefined oils. That is a choice for you guys to make. So when you are reading about soap making, you may see the term water discount used, and you may wonder, what is a water discount? Basically, that just means using less water than the standard given amount in the recipe. It's often done to make soap harden up quicker, and it can also be done to try and minimise the risk of soda ash. So those are just a couple of reasons why you may want to discount the amount of water in your recipe. For example, if a recipe called for 200 grams of water and you chose to use 150 grams of water, that would be classed as water discounting. You should never discount your water to less than a 1-to-1 lye to water ratio. So if you are using 100 grams of lye, you should never use less than 100 grams of water. And if you are a new soaper, we wouldn't recommend going down that low. For new soapers, we recommend using 2 parts water to 1 part lye. So if you're using 100 grams of lye, use 200 grams of water. You just have a little bit more time to play with your soap, and it gives you just a little bit more control over your soap. So if you are a new soaper, we wouldn't recommend trying to play around with water discounts until you have got a bit more familiar and a bit more used to soap making. So you may then see the term emulsify or emulsification, and this is referring to when you have mixed your lye water in with your oils and you have used the blender, or if you're not using a blender, you've used your whisk and you are mixing them together. And the point of emulsification is when your oils and your lye have combined with each other and they aren't separating out any longer. So do a little whisk around and then leave your pot alone for say 20-30 seconds. And if when you look at the top of the batter, it is all still incorporated, that is emulsification. If you can see oil on the top or it's starting to separate, you haven't reached emulsification and you need to keep whisking. So emulsification is when the oils and the lye have come together and aren't going to separate out in your pots anymore. And after emulsification comes trace. Trace is one step on from emulsification. There are 3 levels of trace. There is a light trace, there is medium trace, and there is thick trace. And light trace is where after you've done your mixing, if you lift your blender out, it will kind of drizzle it over the top of the soap batter. It will leave a very light mark on the surface of the batter, but that will disappear pretty quickly. That is a light trace. Medium trace, we like to say, has a similar consistency to something like custard. And if you pull your blender out of your bowl and sort of sprinkle it over the top of the batter, it will leave a kind of noticeable trace mark over your batter. And it is quite a nice consistency to work with, we think. I think if you're a new soap maker, go for a medium trace, because sometimes with light trace it is tough to tell if you're actually at trace, and thick trace is hard to work with. So if you're a new soap maker, go for that kind of custard-like trace consistency. And thick trace is a consistency that is harder to work with. It is much thicker. It is good if you want to do kind of big textured tops and things like that. However, it is harder to work with in that you may need to spoon it into your mould, it may not pour very well, and it is more prone to getting air bubbles in your soaps. So unless you have a very good reason for needing a thick trace, such as lots of elaborate texturing or designs like that, then we don't tend to really like working at thick trace because it is a hard consistency to work with in terms of soap making. And on the subject of trace, the next terminology we are going to discuss is false trace. And false trace is when you think that your soap batter has reached the trace consistency, but it hasn't. And this can often happen if you are soaping at cooler temperatures. And what happens is you add your lye water into your soap and you start mixing, and then you've got some of the oils, typically solid oils, so things like coconut oil and cocoa butter, and they will cool down and they will actually start to solidify and thicken in your soap batter. And that gives the illusion that your mix is thickening up, and you get the illusion that it's coming to trace when it is actually not. If you are not sure whether you have reached a real trace or a false trace, then, as I mentioned before, leave the bowl alone for 20 to 30 seconds and look for any separation, any oil on top of the pan. If you don't see any of that, it's highly likely you are at a real trace. If there is any separation or oil on top of the batter, then keep mixing, keep blending and keep going, because you will be at a false trace if you get any kind of separation. So if you're not sure, just keep whizzing for a little bit longer, because you don't want to achieve false trace, because it will not set up well, and when you cut your soap you might get kind of bits oozing out, or you might get soap that is lye heavy in places because it hasn't combined properly. So false trace is not something you want to be working with. And something else you don't want are the next three words we're going to discuss: ricing, seizing and accelerating. These are three negative things when you are soap making, and they are generally associated They are generally associated with fragrance oils. Certain fragrance oils do not behave well in soap, and if you happen to be using a fragrance oil that isn't a good behaviour in soap, then you could get ricing, seizing or accelerating. Ricing is where you pop your fragrance oil in and you're mixing, and then all of a sudden it goes to almost a consistency of like a rice pudding. You are getting things that basically look like rice in your soap batter, and you think, why has it done this? What is going on? That is ricing, and it is often caused by the fragrance oil. Seizing is similar. You pop your fragrance oil in, you're mixing, and then all of a sudden, before you know it, your soap is almost rock hard in a clump. You can't really pour it, you can't mix it, it is just completely seized up. That is seized soap. It is no good for anything, and it is again probably down to the fragrance oil that you have chosen to use. Acceleration or accelerating batter is similar but not as bad as seizing or ricing. It is when you pop in your fragrance oil and your batter starts to thicken a lot quicker than you may have wanted it to. These kind of soaps are still usable, they're still fine. You can still make a soap loaf with a batter that has accelerated, but you will have to work quickly, and you're not going to be able to do intricate swirls or intricate designs in a soap where the batter has accelerated. Basically, you want to work quickly, you want to get it in the mould, and then it will be fine. Now, in terms of getting soaps into the mould and decoration, the next word you may be wondering, what is it, is embeds. Embeds are basically separate little bits of soap. We make ours out of cold processed soap, but you can make them out of melt and pour as well. And they are decorations that you have made separately that can either go through the centre of the soap, or you can use them to decorate the top of soaps. For example, these little flowers that we made out of soap for one of our previous videos, they are just little soap embeds, and they sit on the top of our soap. So an embed is a decoration that goes on the top of the soap or in the centre of the soap, kind of in with the batter. Embeds! So the next word we're going to cover is gel. What is gel? What is gel phase? Gel is what happens as soap heats up and starts the saponification process. If enough heat is generated within that soap, then the soap will change and will take on a slightly translucent look. This is what is known as gelling, and gelled soap really helps colours, especially natural colours, to pop. And the soap tends to harden quicker when it has been gelled as well. Sometimes people don't want the soap to gel, and if you don't want your soap to gel, you can pop it into a fridge. But We like to gel our soaps. We think it really does make the colours pop. So that is what is known by the term gel or gelling. And on the subject of gelling, a partial gel is another term that we sometimes hear. And partial gel is similar to gelling, but in this scenario, the soap hasn't actually generated enough heat to gel the soap the whole way through. And it is often the outside of the bars, the edges of the bars that haven't gelled. They remain perhaps a paler colour, whereas the inside of the soap has gelled and has taken on that darker colour. And you may well get what is known as a gel ring, where the centre of the soap has gelled, but the edges haven't. And that is basically just because the soap didn't heat up quite enough for it to gel the whole way through. You can actually rectify that in a number of ways, and we are moving on to one of those ways now. The next word is CPOP, C-P-O-P, which stands for Cold Process Oven Process. And this is cold process soap that has been placed in an oven that has been pre-warmed. We pre-warm ours if we do CPOP method. We pre-warm to 50 degrees centigrade, and then we turn off the oven before the soap goes in. And the whole point of this is you are trying to force the soap to heat up and go through the gel phase so that it gels the whole way through and you get a lovely consistent colour. So if somebody mentions CPOP or cold process oven process to you, that is what they are talking about, and the reason to do it is generally to try and force the soap to gel the whole way through. And on that note, the term force gel basically means to use a method such as the cold process oven process method that I have just described to try and ensure that your soap goes through gel phase, to ensure that you get those lovely bright colours throughout the whole of the soap. So yeah, forcing gel is any method where you are trying to ensure that the whole of the soap goes through gel phase. Now, superfats. You may have heard people talking about superfatting their soaps, and you are thinking, what on earth does superfat mean? Superfat is the amount of excess oil that is left over in your soap after saponification has taken place. We tend to superfat our soaps around about 5%, 6%. Our salt bars we superfat at 20%, but that is a different method and we have our reasons for doing that. But our general soap bars we superfat at around 5 to 6%. It adds a nice feel to the soap, and by superfatting at 5%, we are also ensuring that our soaps are not going to be lye heavy, which is something that you definitely don't want. And the next word on our list is saponification. And saponification is the word used to describe the chemical reaction that occurs between the oils and the lye to create the soap. That is what is known as saponification. And with cold process soap, it generally takes between 24 and 72 hours for the soap to be pretty much 100% saponified. There may be a little bit of lye left to saponify after that, but the majority of the reaction will be completely taken place by 72 hours. And that is when your soap is going to be technically safe to use. It's not a good idea to use it for reasons we shall get into in a minute, but it will technically, by 72 hours, be safe to use because saponification has taken place. And in line with saponification, you get the SAP value, which is the saponification value. And that is a term to describe the amount of lye that is required to turn 1 gram of oil into 1 gram of soap. So if you hear people talking about the SAP value or the saponification value, they are talking, say, about how much lye is required to make 1 gram of soap from 1 gram of oil. Now, moving on, we shall come on to soda ash. Soda ash is a term that you have probably heard, and it is something you will probably experience at some point as well. Soda ash is a white powdery film that is sometimes present just on the top of soaps after you unmould them. It is harmless, but if you don't like the look of it, it can be easily steamed off with a steamer or sponged off. But the first time you use a soap and you kind of get it under hot water and you use it, that soda ash will disappear anyway and won't come back. Soda ash seems to be more likely to occur in soaps where a water discount hasn't been used, and it also to us seems more likely to occur when we are soaping at lower temperatures. That's not to say it won't occur if you are soaping at a high temperature with a water discount. It may occur, but we have found it is less likely to. And then we move on to curing. And some people seem to talk about curing and saponification as if they're the same thing. They're not. We have covered what saponification is. Curing is the amount of time after you have made your soap that it needs to be left to sit, to firm up and to form its crystalline structure to actually turn into a proper bar of soap that's going to be good to use. As I mentioned, your soap is technically safe to use after 72 hours. However, it hasn't been cured properly. Soap needs a minimum of 4 weeks to cure. 4 to 6 weeks is even better, and certain soaps, such as Castile soaps, will take up to a year to cure. The reason that you don't want to be using a bar of soap after 3 days is because it hasn't had a chance to cure, and if you use that bar of soap, it is likely going to be not as mild and gentle on your skin. It'll still be fine to use, but it's not going to feel as nice, and also it is highly likely to turn soft or mushy after you've used it once or twice. You are not going to have a long-lasting bar of soap if you're using it before you have cured for at least 4 weeks minimum. We like to cure our soaps for 6 weeks if we can. Sometimes we cure for a few days less if we have a very busy period, but generally it is a 6-week minimum cure that we like to give our soaps. So do not be tempted to use your soaps before they've had their correct cure time, because they're not going to be as nice as they really could be if you give them the full 4 to 6 week minimum cure time. And lastly, on our definitions, you may see people in forums going on about DOS. And DOS is dreaded orange spots. And you do not want DOS. You do not want dreaded orange spots. These are literally little orangey beige kind of spots and marks that sometimes appear on your soaps. And they can occur when the oils that you used to make your soaps were past their best before date, perhaps a little bit rancid. We know you don't want to be making soap with oils that are past their best, and you definitely don't want to be making soap with rancid oils. If you do, it is likely that you will get dreaded orange spots. There are other reasons why dreaded orange spots can occur. If you are using a high superfat, that does raise the chance of getting DOS. Certain fragrance oils can also contribute to a higher likelihood of them occurring. And soap left to cure without adequate ventilation can also contribute. Similarly, if you don't want to cure on metal like aluminium or any metal that can rust, things like that, because that can also raise the chance of you getting those dreaded orange spots. Technically, soap with dreaded orange spots is safe to use, but it doesn't look very nice, and sometimes it doesn't smell very nice either. So although technically, yeah, you can use it, it's not going to look or smell very nice. In fact, some soap with dreaded orange spots can smell absolutely horrible. Some of it doesn't smell too bad, so it really just depends. But it's not going to be soap that can be really sold. And if it's personal use, it's safe to use, but it's not going to be the best that it could be. So we want to try and avoid dreaded orange spots, if at all possible. So there we go, that is soap making terminology. I hope I haven't completely confused the heck out of you all with all of those descriptions. There was a lot of terminology I wanted to cover, but I really had to cut some out because I thought there is no point in bombarding you guys with all these words, because if it's the first time you are being introduced to some of these terms, it's not going to help to overload your brain with loads of stuff. So I've just told you about the ones that I think are the most important ones to know, and the words that are going to help you as you kind of go on in your soap making journey. So that is today's video, and tomorrow we're going to be on day 5, and that means that we are going to be making our first soap all together. If you want to know the recipe, then check out yesterday's video, the video where we discussed oils, because at the end of that video I do discuss our recipe and I do say what you need in terms of oils and lye and things like that. So come along and join us and make the soap with us. We're going to be doing a lavender soap tomorrow, a very basic, it's not going to be coloured, it will be scented, and you can decorate the top if you wish to. It's not going to be coloured tomorrow, but I'm excited. I am looking forward to it, and hopefully you guys are too. Hopefully you will come back and you will join us for the soap making tomorrow. So yeah, we will see you then. Please do like and subscribe. Give us a comment if you've got any questions about the videos or soap making, anything you want to know. drop us a comment. We'll see you for our soap making tomorrow. Bye!
Bye.